In 1593, King Henry IV of France issued a promise that would become legendary. He declared that he wanted no peasant in his kingdom to be so impoverished that they could not afford a chicken in their pot every Sunday. It was a noble vision, a political pledge of prosperity. However, while the king was delivering his speeches, the peasants were already nourishing themselves. They did not require a chicken, and they did not require the king, because for 5 centuries, their pots had been filled by a different Henry. This one was not a royal monarch, it was a weed. They referred to it as Good King Henry, Chenopodium bonus Henricus. From the 12th century until the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, this plant served as the engine of European survival. It flourished in every cottage garden from England to Germany. It was not a commodity you purchased, nor was it something you had to replant every year. It was a perennial. You placed it in the ground once, and it provided food for the rest of your life. Today we are examining the history of the peasant's asparagus and exploring why modern agriculture felt the need to eliminate it. It was not because the plant failed, but because it functioned too effectively. To comprehend why this plant vanished, you must first understand what was lost. If you had stepped into a Tudor garden in 1550, Good King Henry would have been the anchor. In March, it produced thick stalks that tasted like sweet asparagus. By May, it grew leaves with a flavor similar to spinach, and it continued producing until the first frost. For centuries, it was the foundation of medieval vegetable soups, paired with leeks, chard, and bread in a vitamin-rich broth that sustained peasant farmers through harsh winters. The Romans were aware of it. Pliny the Elder wrote of a plant that Emperor Tiberius demanded as tribute from Germanic tribes. Most historians believe he was referring to Good King Henry. The emperor desired it that intensely. Nutritionally, it makes modern spinach seem like cardboard. In 1989, a study published in an agricultural journal measured the nutritional profile of Good King Henry. Later in 2022, the Backyard Larder ranked perennial vegetables based on nutritional density. Good King Henry outperformed spinach, kale, and chard across several micronutrient categories. Its iron content is higher than spinach, its calcium is higher than milk, and its vitamin C levels are extraordinary. It contains more B vitamins than most leafy greens. This is complete nutrition from a plant that required zero annual labor. There was no tilling, no replanting, and no seeds to purchase every spring. It simply appeared every year like a loyal friend. So where did it go? Why are we spending billions of dollars genetically modifying climate-resilient crops when a perfect, drought-proof vegetable already exists? The answer is not a conspiracy. It is a problem of geometry. The decline of Good King Henry began in 1701 with an English farmer named Jethro Tull. Tull invented the seed drill, a brilliant machine that mechanized planting, but it had one specific requirement: uniformity. The drill favored annuals, crops that you plant from scratch every year in perfectly straight rows, such as wheat, corn, and turnips. But Good King Henry was chaotic. It grew in clumps and spread through its roots. It did not stay in a straight line. You could not plant it with a drill in perfect rows, and you could not mechanize its harvest. In the language of emerging industrial agriculture, it was deemed inefficient. When the Industrial Revolution arrived, farmers stopped focusing on food and started focusing on efficiency. In 1837, John Deere invented the steel plow. For the first time, farmers could break virgin prairie soil and convert it into farmland. However, perennial root systems, the kind Good King Henry developed over decades, were the enemy of the plow. They held the soil together and resisted being broken apart. Annual crops, with their shallow, weak roots, were easy to manage. You plowed, you planted, you harvested, and then you plowed again. The system selected for annuals not because they were better for the soil, better for nutrition, or better for farmers, but because they were better for machines. By 1900, the tractor had replaced the horse. Every single machine we constructed was designed to do one thing: wipe the earth clean and start fresh every spring. Perennials like Good King Henry fought back. Their roots reached down 3 feet, holding the soil and breaking the plows. In the eyes of the machine, this plant's greatest strength, its resilience, became its fatal flaw. It was labeled inefficient, not because it failed to feed people, but because it slowed down the tractor. But machines are only half of the story. If the tractor was the weapon, the business model provided the motive. In the 1920s, the modern commercial seed industry exploded. Companies like Burpee, Ferry-Morse, and Northrop King realized a fundamental truth of capitalism. Perennials are a terrible product. Think about it. If I sell you a packet of spinach seeds, you have to return and buy more next year and the year after that. It represents recurring revenue. If I sell you Good King Henry seeds, I never see you again. You plant it once, and your children are still eating from it 20 years later. It is self-sufficiency, and self-sufficiency is the enemy of profit. By 1950, seed catalogs had quietly removed perennial vegetables. Good King Henry disappeared from commercial offerings, not because it stopped working, but because it worked too well. Then came the final blow, the Green Revolution. In 1960, Norman Borlaug introduced high-yielding dwarf wheat varieties. The promise was simple: more calories per acre. The cost, however, was hidden: total dependence on synthetic fertilizers, mechanization, and annual replanting. The Green Revolution saved 1 billion people from starvation. That is a fact. But it also locked global agriculture into a system where perennial vegetables had no place. Governments subsidized annual grain crops. Universities focused their research budgets on corn, wheat, and in soybeans. Agricultural extension services taught farmers to think in planting seasons rather than perennial plots. We bet the entire farm on annuals. We chose wheat, corn, and soy. We accepted a system where 70% of our cropland requires violent tillage every single year, destroying the soil, releasing carbon, and demanding synthetic fertilizers just to keep growing. We traded a plant that takes care of itself for plants that are on life support. Today, annual crops occupy 70% of global cropland, while perennial crops occupy only 13%. Think about that. 94% of all plant species on Earth are perennial, but only 13% of our farmland grows them. We chose the exception and made it the rule. And what did we lose? Start with the soil. Annual agriculture requires tillage. Every year you break the earth open, plant seeds, and then leave the soil bare for months, leading to wind erosion, water runoff, and carbon release. The American Dust Bowl of the 1930s was caused by exactly this: plowing up perennial prairie grasses and replacing them with annual wheat. Perennials like Good King Henry have root systems that go down 3 feet or more. They hold the soil together year-round, preventing erosion and sequestering carbon. Research from the Land Institute shows that perennial crops reduce soil erosion by up to 50% compared to annuals. Then there is the water. Annual crops lose up to 5 times more water than perennials because their shallow roots cannot access deep moisture. In a world facing water scarcity, we build our entire food system around the most water-inefficient plants possible, and the chemicals. Annual monocultures require synthetic fertilizers because tilling destroys soil biology. They require pesticides because bare fields are vulnerable to weeds and pests. Good King Henry needed none of this. Its deep roots accessed nutrients other plants could not reach. Its year-round coverage suppressed weeds naturally. We are now living with the bill for that decision: soil erosion, water scarcity, and nutrient collapse. The annual experiment is failing. But nature plays the long game. While the tractors were conquering the fields, Good King Henry did not actually die. It retreated. It survived in the margins, in the gardens of stubborn grandmothers in Yorkshire, in wild patches near old monasteries, and in the mountains of Switzerland. And now the vault is opening again because the rules are changing. We are finally realizing that efficiency is not efficient if it destroys a soil. In 2009, the Land Institute released Kernza, the first commercially viable perennial grain. It has taken 2 decades of breeding, but perennial wheat is finally becoming a reality. Climate change is forcing us to reconsider annuals. Soil degradation is accelerating, and water is becoming scarce. Suddenly, the characteristics we bred out of our food system, deep roots, permanent coverage, and self-sufficiency, look less like inefficiency and more like survival. In 2022, the USDA updated the Conservation Stewardship Program to include perennials for the first time. It is a small change, but it signals something larger: a recognition that the annual monoculture system is not sustainable in the long term. And Good King Henry never actually disappeared. You can buy seeds online today. You can plant them this spring. And unlike every other vegetable you grow, you will not have to plant them again. They will return every year for the next 20 years. The shoots will come up in March, the leaves will follow in April, and you will taste something most people have not tasted in a century. Food that does not depend on a system, food that opts out of the machine, food that grows on its own timeline, by its own rules without asking permission. When those shoots emerge next March, and the March after that, you will be participating in a quiet rebellion. You will be eating food that exists outside the industrial timeline, food that does not need a tractor, a seed company, or a king's permission. King Henry III's promise of a chicken in every pot depended on wealth, commerce, and a functioning economy. When economies collapsed, the promise failed. The other King Henry, the plant that lived in gardens for 500 years, asked for nothing. It just grew. One made a promise that required the world to cooperate. The other kept a promise the world had forgotten how to hear. And now, maybe we are starting to listen again. If this story changed how you see the weeds in your garden, please subscribe and like this video. We are uncovering the history that they tried to plow over and bury. Some promises are made with words, but others are kept in roots that refuse to die. Let's plant the future together. The next treasure of history will be revealed soon.